Amazing discussion that we had there, and some fascinating points on privacy and the importance of privacy for users, especially when it comes to applications, which kind of brings us to our next conversation. Now we're touching on the centralized exchanges versus decentralized exchanges debate, and what it means for retail investors when it comes to the different elements and pillars of decentralization. So we have our speakers now joining us. Thank you guys so much for joining. And I'm going to leave you guys to jump straight in. Grant, I believe you'll be moderating. I'm also happy to sit in if you guys... Yeah? Sure? Okay, awesome. Great, because it seems like we're one person short, and it seems the person is the moderator. So maybe what we can do is just kind of go around the table, and I can ask each of you guys to introduce yourself and where you lie in the centralized versus decentralized exchange camp. Maybe we can start with you.
Scott McNealy, formerly famous and important at Sun Microsystems. Currently doing a lot of advisory work and working a .org to try and fix education. And on DEX versus CEX, I'm right in the middle. I think both are important.
George Kushner with H2cryptO. We are certainly a centralized exchange, and our focus is trying to help effectuate broad and mass adoption through retail clients all around the world.
I'm Grant Van Wyk. I'm the CTO for BABB. We're a financial inclusion platform, and we're also in the middle. We're trying to give ordinary people access to both digital and traditional capital instruments, and being able to connect to both is very important.
I'm Jihan Wu, co-founder of BABB. Right now I'm working at Matrixport, a crypto asset management firm. I think that the DeFi will bring a lot of change to CeFi, but I am more leaning to the CeFi world.
Hi, Bobby Zagotta. I'm the CEO for the Americas and the Global Chief Commercial Officer for Bitstamp. So we're a centralized exchange. We're actually the longest running centralized or any type exchange in the crypto world, founded in 2011. And yeah, I see this more complementary than competitive, but anxious to get into the conversation.
And out of interest, I want to turn to the audience and ask how many of you, if you could raise your hands, have used a centralized exchange throughout your crypto journey? Okay, and how many decentralized exchanges? Okay, and actually that's quite a surprising 50-50 outcome. It seems pretty kind of equal there. So Bobby, if I turn to you and just ask, because you mentioned that you see the world of centralized exchanges and decentralized as being more complementary than competitive. What do you mean by that, and how would you see that shaping the landscape in the next 1 year, 2 years, for example?
Sure. Well, firstly, as somebody who's been in the crypto world for quite a while now, I think the DeFi space in general is one of the most exciting and interesting and fascinating and challenging kind of parts of the ecosystem. It's really quite incredible how far it's come in a relatively short amount of time, and the possibilities associated with it are quite mind-blowing. So I think that's super cool. However, I think it appeals to generally a different type of user today than a centralized exchange might be appealing to. So I think decentralized exchanges have a different risk profile than centralized exchanges, and they also require a level of sophistication today that centralized exchanges probably do not. So if you think of where we are in the kind of macro level adoption cycle, centralized exchanges and the roles that they play, I think is just going to get more important in the near term as it becomes more of a mainstream opportunity for people, right? Why? Because it's got fiat on-ramps, because they're more transparently regulated, because they are kind of dialed in for new users. There's lots of support and education, and even such as on Bitstamp, you can actually talk to a live person in 22 seconds. And I think, whereas in 2019 that wasn't so important because people were pioneering, in 2024, 2023, it's going to be very important.
And you mentioned there regulators and also the fact that if you do need a customer service representative, you can call someone up, you can speak to someone. So that kind of is the counter argument for decentralized exchanges when it comes to some of the challenges there, when it comes to expecting a customer service rep, if you're the retail investor, giving you that element of security. But then also for the regulator to go knocking on someone's door that owns a DEX, it's also a little bit challenging. So this is open to the floor and anyone can answer. Would you say that the regulatory element is one of the biggest counterparts against decentralized exchanges, and hence why we wouldn't necessarily see such a kind of open landscape in the future?
I'll pick up on that. Our platform tries to, in the previous discussion, they were talking about when is like blockchain not going to be a thing, and rather just the background tech, which it essentially is. I think it applies as well to most of these conversations. You need to try create apps that are, as Bobby suggested, easy enough for people to use that it becomes sort of intuitive, and they don't need to be concerned about how it's happening, but they need to be able to trust that it happens, and they can very easily interact with whatever the application might be doing. And I think the problem with that DEXs might have right now is that they are essentially a contract that's deployed. It works to a set of rules. If a user doesn't understand those rules, they're going to struggle in that environment. I think probably what we have to do, and certainly what we're trying to do at BABB, is create that environment that the user doesn't have to have that struggle, that it happens seamlessly for them, and it just becomes a background thing. Maybe they'll get a better rate on one exchange versus another, and that might be their choice, but they shouldn't have to struggle with the decision of which one they're going to use because maybe they don't understand how to interact with a DEX versus a centralized exchange.
Can I quickly jump in? I think that, we're all hitting on the same themes and same points, that the complexities, the overwrought complexities just run rampant throughout our industry. And the reality is, I was just speaking a few minutes ago, and the statistics are pretty amazing. We come to these conferences and we just presume that crypto is ubiquitous. Everyone owns it. The reality is we're talking about a teeny tiny cottage industry. You have 300 million people out of 8 billion that have exposure to crypto. It's less than 400 basis points. And the single pain point that keeps showing up in research over and over and over again is its complexity. So I think all the things we're talking about, we're still very, very early on, which I don't know about anybody in this room, but I've never been around an industry that's been around now for almost 14 years, and everybody talks about it's still so early, which is fantastic. But I think it's incumbent upon all of us to really go out there and promote awareness and education, dispel the misnomers, misconceptions about the space. And I absolutely see a world where DEXs and centralized exchanges coexist. I would love to partner with them as a centralized exchange. They need on and off ramps to get to their clients, right? So this is a space that is going to be taking off. But I think right now, when you look at kind of a DEX versus a centralized exchange, you're juxtaposing kumquats and watermelons. And what I mean by that is, even though a centralized exchange for the average person coming into the space has complexities, it would be much more akin to someone purchasing stocks or bonds or ETFs. And then when you start looking at a DEX, it's more akin to buying total return swaps on the Nikkei, right? I came from financial services, and I know this stuff is difficult, and I have a heavy background. So it does sound like we all have a commonality, that we see the bright future, we see the growth, we just need to help promote its awareness and its functionalities. And lastly, you were mentioning about regulation. I do think that the DEXs will have, at least here in the United States, a bit of a target around them because of the anonymity. And I think that's something that's going to be very interesting, and we'll see how that kind of divulges over time. But I do think that's going to be a big, big issue with the regulators.
Yeah, the DEX, I think, is very deregulated these days, especially for the retail investors who don't have kind of a pressure from its own compliance officers. but lots of institutional investors will not touch DEX because the compliance officer will say, who you are trading against with, yeah, it's money laundering, lots of risk associated with. So CEX right now get kind of the advantage over the regulation. But I think that's maybe not a problem for the DEX in long term. And DEX will also bring change to the CEX in the way of kind of a transparency. CEX got lots of regulations passed because it's not transparent, because this ledger is not public, and whether the CEX has used the client's money is not known. So they got lots of legal and compliance doing manually, but the DEX changed a lot. It's a whole framework change. Everything is transparent. For example, this year in June of the crypto crash, people actually trust Uniswap more than any centralized financial service. That's because everything happens in the MakerDAO, in the Uniswap is very transparent. People know what's going on. But I think this will also not be a problem in the long term for CEX, because the CEX will adopt such kind of a change because they will know that the customers want this. Customer wants transparency, instantly being auditable. This kind of things will happen to CEX as well. So eventually we will see what kind of business model will be better and what kind of a way that the consumer and the investors engaged with the service provider will be better. And looking at both sides, I think that the CEX will still play a long-term advantage in the long run. Yeah.
As a newcomer to all this, I think CEX is a better name than DEX, so maybe they're going to win. But I look at it from ease of use and from risk in terms of my personal participation and what I want to go do. And I think the risk mitigation is still a big issue for people. People still think that it's a Ponzi scheme or it's a fabrication or they don't know what's going on out there. And they also worry about custody. And I think custody is going to become a very, very big issue. I don't think it's a risk that the centralized exchanges should or want to take on hosting that stuff, hand it off to your customer, but then the complexity issue becomes very high. And that's where I got involved in the industry. And you can go see iCoin down on the floor, and they basically have, you got to touch it, you got to hold it. It's like a little iPhone, no radio. And it becomes your cold storage wallet. It does not talk to the internet. There's no radio on it. It uses all of the iPhone technology, very inexpensive, but it talks to your cell phone. I need one more hand. Usually I speak with a microphone, but a lapel, but it talks using QR codes, and you get a QR code printed out on a little printer that's all automatic. And what's the beauty of this thing is it's cold storage. It is absolutely air-gapped, and there is no radio. This never talks to the network. That is the most secure way you can do custody, and I'd rather have my custody. Heck, the FBI is breaking into, they did it here in LA, they broke into the safety deposit boxes and stole $63 million worth of stuff. You want to keep this with you. Nobody's going to hack this. First of all, they can't, and second of all, it only has my Bitcoin in there, my keys. It doesn't have the entire exchange's key. Why do you rob a bank? Because that's where all the money is. You don't go home by home trying to rob people. That's just not you're gonna get caught. And so from a security and safety and an ease of use perspective, something that has a full display, a high-res camera, automatically prints out all of my codes are here, and I can hide that under my mattress, whatever. It starts to take some of that security and safety and trust issue out of there. I do know one thing about all of this that I don't think we push hard enough as an industry. I'm trusting whoever wrote that Bitcoin code, put the source code out there, I'm trusting that there's only 21 million coins. And you know what? I trust that. Somebody I've never met, don't even know who he is, don't know if he's even alive, or she, but I'm trusting that person way more than I trust the people who are controlling the dollar. Because I know they're destroying the value of the dollar at 15% per year, every year, and are going to want to do that electronically. And somebody once said, you have no privacy, get over it. And I think the privacy opportunities go away if what is it called? DLSD, or what was the government, DSCDs, or the digital, what's it called? We were talking about in the previous one, where the government gets involved.
CBDC?
Yes, those. That scares me to death. So I think those are the big issues: ease of use, trust and safety, and then anonymity.
And Scott, you made a really compelling point there for the need for decentralization to the kind of nth degree. I think for a lot of newcomers that we will welcome into the space when we do see new waves of adoption each market cycle is the responsibility that goes on to users when it comes to seed phrases. It seems like a majority of the masses still aren't ready to hold that level of responsibility themselves. So I'm making the most of the fact we have co-founders, CTOs, and CEOs on the panels here. What do you think we need to see in the user interface of both centralized but also decentralized exchanges? What do you think we need to see change or improve for this next wave of adoption into cryptocurrencies?
I can take a whack. So, I think that there's an awful lot that has to happen because, as I alluded to before, the people who are in the markets, all of you today, even today, are pioneers still, right? So there's, in 2018 when I got involved, 2019, the people and the companies getting involved were going to get involved no matter what. They were going to put up with crazy interfaces, they're going to put up with regulatory ambiguity, and they're going to put up with anything. But these next waves are different. I think they have much higher expectations for the experience and for the certainty of it, and they have more choice, frankly, than the people who came before them. So the whole thing is going to change, and both for CEXs, my new favorite word, and DEXs, we have to adapt. We have to be, I think, really simple to interface with. One of the things that centralized exchanges do well, I think, is we're very, very good for traders, right? For institutions and sophisticated traders. We have advanced order types, we have serious liquidity, we have, lots of ancillary services, capital efficiency type plays that make it a great offering, I think. But we also, increasingly, have good offerings for brand new people who are just curious today. Bitstamp recently did a pretty serious survey of about 28,000 respondents across 27 countries about trust and sentiment relative to cryptocurrency. And the numbers in terms of trust were quite high, much higher than you would think reading the mainstream press. But by the same token, the barriers were exactly what was mentioned earlier. Lack of education. Something like 44% of people said, I really want to participate, I don't know how to get started. 44% of the people who responded. And then also regulation was mentioned as a major barrier. I'm just going to sit on the sidelines until we get this figured out. And so these are both issues that CEXs, DEXs, we all need to work together to address.
I think, Bobby hit on some very important points, and going back to what I was mentioning a few minutes ago about the 300 million pool of people currently in the space. I personally see that this industry right now is being controlled, and I mean no offense to either group, because I'm one of these groups in full disclosure, but you have a bunch of finance geeks like myself and tech geeks. And the rest of the world is sitting there kind of either not even paying attention or twiddling their thumbs or trying to figure out where all this stuff is just going to end up. There are a lot of haters. I think the industry, we have not done a great job in PR. I think that you continually on a daily basis see the people talking about the nefarious activities when nobody stands up and says, well, why don't you just juxtapose that against fiat? And then everybody will shut up really, really quickly because they look like fools. But again, I agree, the educational component. The reality is a lot of exchanges out there are what we would consider kind of a DIYer. And if you can't tell with my accent, I come from Atlanta, Georgia, Home Depot, do-it-yourself model. And the reality is this stuff is treacherous, and it really shouldn't be a do-it-yourself model, especially for the newbies. And I think that's kind of retarding growth, preventing growth. And so, you know, our whole value prop, and we're going after a whole new different, you know, we're going after the brand newbies, the people that want to get into the space. They've done a little bit of cursory research, but they're still afraid. So we're just offering the hand-holding, right, the 24/7, 365 live support to be there for you. Because we understand, I mean, when I got into this industry, and again, coming from Wall Street, I used to sell derivatives to central banks. And although I'm not a smart guy, I'm pretty decent with markets. I'm pretty good with setting up accounts. And I immediately ran into problems. There's nowhere to turn. So this is not an isolated story. You know, this is just across the industry. And I think these issues will abound until, again, there's kind of a broader pull and push from every leader in the industry to try and promote this education and awareness. And let's face it, I mean, the market certainly isn't helping us as well. And I think that's also brought out a lot of the haters saying, see, I told you, Bitcoin's gone from almost 70,000 to 20,000. I told you this thing was just a crock. But that will change. You know, last thing I'll say is, which it's very interesting timing. For those of you old enough, there's a clip running around the internet right now where Bill Gates was on David Letterman in 1995. Now, for someone like me, 1995 was not that long ago. But the clip shows Bill Gates trying to explain to Letterman about the internet, and Letterman's just railing on him, like, what do you, like, this doesn't, like, who cares about that? Maybe a bunch of tech nerds and computer geeks, but nobody's gonna care about this. And Bill Gates is guy being sheepish, going, okay. And this is exactly where we are today with crypto and blockchain. It's just a matter of people doing some cursory education. It's about getting out there, promoting it, and then mass adoption is going to be coming, zero doubt about that.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to agree with you on that point. I think it's definitely about the education. It's about the PR. It's about the community making an effort to be more inviting to people who don't necessarily get it. You know, you don't necessarily understand how your car works. I'm talking about maybe the engine and all, but you still drive it. And that's where we need to get the industry to. Part of our platform is specifically around trying to create financial inclusion. We're in the fortunate position, we're a UK-based business, but we're in the fortunate position to have our regulatory approval now for both crypto and electronic money. And that has all of a sudden opened so many more doors, but specifically because of the electronic money. So it just gives an indication that the industry is still wary of crypto. Unfortunately, that is linked to blockchain, which it shouldn't be. You know, crypto is something that works on top of the technology that is blockchain. But in essence, if we can create that environment where people trust, and that's maybe because you're regulated, or maybe because the way that you've designed your application makes it intuitive for them to use, it's going to make a big difference. When it comes to a DEX and regulation, I think in theory you would immediately say, well, it's going to be very difficult for them to be regulated. Well, I actually disagree. Regulation is ticking boxes. You know, the regulator, they come and they give you a checklist of things and they say, are you doing the following things? And you have to demonstrate that you're doing that. And actually, from a DEX point of view, it would be relatively simple because your rule sets are coded in. They don't change. So, you know, once you can show that that's happening, they shouldn't bother you again. I think CEXs would have to probably go through an ongoing conversation with regulators.
You're so young.
You'll have to go through an ongoing conversation because potentially you're continually adding more products or more pairs or new features. You know, one of the advantages you guys have is you can offer leverage, which would be quite complicated for a DEX to do potentially. But in essence, it's all about how we look after the users in the environment. I think that's what it'll ultimately boil down to. If you can create a platform or an application or an ecosystem that everyday people, and when I say everyday people, I mean people outside of the community, feel comfortable with, I think you'll get much better engagement.
So I suggest we solve the ease of use problems fast, because the biggest weapon the government has is the Treasury and Fed and the money supply, the printing presses that they have. And the money supply has almost tripled in the last 10 years. That's an unbelievable tax on every asset and an income denominated in dollars. And if they see any kind of threat to that machine, they're not going to enforce the regulations. They're going to change the regulations and try and regulate this out of business. Reagan had it right when he said they're going to regulate everything out, and then once they get it done, they'll subsidize it, which is the government electronic cryptocurrency. So that's my big fear, but I'm still advocating anybody to ask me. I say put 15% of your investable assets into Bitcoin as a store of value, as a hedge. It weighs less. This weighs less than gold. So, and I think it's a little easier to use and a little easier to go to a central exchange and get it into a fiat currency when and if you need it. But I want to have this. I mean, I want to be able to stick this in a stuffed bear and send it to Portugal or New Zealand or wherever I got to go if I got to go. And I'll meet my money over there, and I will have something that's fungible. That's literally a way to go. And I think we have solved, this is a third generation environment. I think the exchanges are getting way easier to use. I let my wife handle all of it. I just ran a computer company. What would I know about technology? She runs it, she handles it, she handles it just fine. Makes her nervous, but I think people will get over that. But we've got to go hard and fast and get out there before the government can come in and stop what we're doing. They're already so invasive and controlling, and I just see this as the great hope for financial freedom. I know this is going to be a bigger deal internationally because they don't have fiat currencies in most of the world, and they don't have the banking systems that we have. So I'm happy today to use centralized exchanges for when I want to go to fiat. But I'm in it for the long haul. That's my nest egg and my insurance policy. It's a way better insurance policy than anything I can think of.
Scott, just to be clear, that's a demo. That's a demo account. That's not your real wallet, correct?
It wouldn't matter. You could run this thing over right now, and I could just get a new one. And as long as I have this QR code, I can go create a new one.
I hope you have Brinks guards out front, and we just don't see them, or they're maybe dressed up in here.
If somebody comes at me, I just swallow, and it's fine.
These days, DEX already got more than 100,000 of assets as have a kind of a trading activities in last month. But if you look at the CEX, even the most progressive exchange that are supporting the new tokens is less than 10,000. It's a few thousand of spot tokens being traded. CEX is good at doing this kind of so-called order book exchange ways of trading. It makes the liquidity or price discovering much more effective than the DEX way. Basically, it's kind of AMM or Uniswap V2 or V3 scheme is actually much better scheme of discovering the price. But the DEX has a way of permissionless to list the tokens. So anyone can just issue a token and then list it into Uniswap or SushiSwap. And one of the most high reward token in 2021 Shiba Inu actually is created and firstly issued and created, being traded in Uniswap. And the low centralized exchanges will be able to support it in the first place. Because when CEX starts to support such kind of tokens, it means kind of a backup with its own credibility, burden lots of regulatory pressures, risks, so on. So I think the CEX will continue to work with those most traded tokens, like a few thousands in the world, or maybe I think maybe in the coming years it maybe can be 10 times than right now. But the DEX world will continue to leverage its advantage in supporting tokens at a low entry barrier, and then there may be like millions kinds of tokens being traded on. Right now we are getting into the Web3 era, because lots of we see lots of contents are being created, distributed, and traded onto the blockchain using technologies such as IPFS or RV blockchain. Lots of those pictures, videos, articles are being stored and being linked, distributed on the blockchain. So such kind of contents in the ways of an NFT or digital right token or something like that will be able to trade it in a way that low entry barrier, but maybe just for each kind of assets, just only hundreds of fans are trading against it. That will be happening on DEX for sure. But once such kind of tokens being very large, grows into very large community, just like a Shiba Inu grows from a few founders into a community of tens of millions of traders, then it will be getting to CEX. So the DEX as a way of open innovation machine that it will embrace and enable lots of innovations. I think the innovations will eventually attract more mass adoptions, but those mass adopted, the most traded assets will still be traded a lot in CEX.
And you made an interesting point there when you mentioned that decentralized exchanges possibly have a wider open door for new listings. I used to work with CoinMarketCap during the height of the bull run last year, and at one point there was 28,000 tokens and cryptocurrencies listed on CoinMarketCap's data aggregator. There's a lot of shit out there as well, and I think for centralized exchanges there is a stricter listing policy, and also there is more protection for new investors. So we are wrapping up. I think we have around 2 minutes each. I'd love just to turn to each of you now and ask you what some of the processes you think are really integral for the growth of this industry as a whole for protecting new investors. Anyone can start.
Protecting new investors?
Yes.
Yeah, well, you hit on one of them, right, which is the rigor around the token listing process. So centralized exchanges, or at least speaking for Bitstamp, this is an incredibly labor-intensive effort, particularly in the US, for two reasons. Obviously, we want to get it right, but also because, it's a bit of a seal of approval when you get listed on a major exchange, I think. And we're basically communicating to our customers, we think this is legit. But there's other things too. I mean, we haven't talked about it too much here, but one of the questions in my mind as I think about DEXs and the evolution is this KYC policy, right? So the other thing that centralized exchanges do is they know their customers, and we have rigorous processes around that as well. The question in my mind is, like, to what extent is a lack of KYC part of the DEX value proposition? And is that going to change? And if it changes, is the popularity of DEX going to change also, right? So there's a lot of questions around protecting consumers that DEXs today don't have to worry about. Centralized exchanges absolutely have to worry about, and it's kind of, the tip of everything that we do. The last thing, just quickly, is education. I mentioned it earlier. You know, we just stood up a Learn Center on our website. We're trying to put as much curated content out as possible just to put people into a position to participate, right? Because it's, you know, there's some complexity to it, as we said. There's some risk to it. People should have some real content out there, but the stuff available to you if you do a Google search is, you know, half of it's crap.
I think, well, the whole crypto world is quite high volatile, and to protect the new investors, as the CEX, of course, I think they will have quite a strict listing rules and enhance this technology in this kind of custodian and separate security. But the DEX, I think, will also need to develop some kind of ways to leverage the community's wisdom to label those scam coins. There is no easy way to educate the new investors, because anyway it will require the new investors themselves to spend time and to be smart and to learn those of the knowledge and the skills. So I think for both CEX and DEX, the education efforts is important to protect the new investors.
Yeah, I think certainly I agree with the comments made up to this point. It's definitely about creating a safe environment for users to interact with your service, whether it's centralized or decentralized. Moving forward, certainly, I think a lot of the industry fears regulation, but I think it will also bring some trust and safety to the environment, which should encourage people outside of the community to certainly get more involved and be more comfortable that they have a level of protection for whatever service they might be engaging with. We're quite fortunate that we sit in the middle and we can interact with either. We certainly have a good experience with the centralized exchanges from an integration point of view, and I think it's certainly important to be able to continue to do that. But certainly to do that and allow your users through your own platform to then interact with those services, you do certainly need to make sure that they're very much aware and educated about what it is that they're actually doing. And that certainly comes with sort of a regulated type environment. We do the same thing. We make sure we know our customers. We make sure we do everything in our power to make sure that they feel that they're protected and safe in the environment. And I think if we continue to do that, the whole ecosystem can benefit.
I think one of the first ways for consumers to be protected in this kind of current wild, wild west industry that we're in is for them to protect themselves. I tell people all the time, when you step into a boxing ring, the referee tells you, protect yourself at all times. Investments is the exact same way. I don't care if it's stocks, bonds, commodities, currencies, or Bitcoin. When you're hearing about deals that are being pitched and they're giving you 10,000% returns, or people that are paying you 45% interest and you go running into it, the next thing you know you have zero, folks, I'm sorry, you have to do a little bit of research. There is no excuse whatsoever in today's world where you can jump online and find out where interest rates are, what normalized returns should be on equities, and kind of use that as your barometer. So I think first and foremost, again, everybody wants to get rich overnight. Be careful. You're going to lose your money. I think that I love to hear what Bobby said, honestly, about Bitstamp. And I'm going to take a slightly more sinister approach because I love how rigorous and what diligence you do on these coins. I think the reality is a great majority of our competitors don't do that. And they do just list coins to list coins. They're incented to. Why wouldn't they? I also believe, again, I'm a lot older than most folks in this room, but for those of you old enough to remember 99, 2000, 2001, known as the tech wreck when the NASDAQ lost 90%, which I think Mr. McNealy might know a little bit about. But I think you're going to see that, you know, we have 20,000 tokens, coins out there right now. My personal belief, 90% go to zero. 90% go to zero. So, you know, the KYC things we do in the centralized exchanges, I mean, this is just a fairly, again, it's just because it's very new and there's a lot of things that are going to be changes down the road. But again, we're going to try and protect you, but you also have to protect yourself.
So my perspective is, if you want to store a value and a hedge against the dollar and the Treasury Department and the government, I think Bitcoin is a good, solid, I mean, why take any other chance? That's just my recommendation, but I'm not authorized to do that, so don't take it. I believe ease of use is really critical, and I think you all ought to go down and check out the iCoin thing, because I think the consumer needs to feel and hold their financial assets. It can't all be virtual. That's too scary. And the fact that they can just turn this thing on and you know, they type in their code, 1, 2, 3, 4.
And it's so cute.
Yeah,
like
and it's got its own little thing, and you can go to the home page, and you can go click on your Ethereum or your, this matters. And they know that if they lose it, they can go get a new one and reboot it. They got a printer that does all this. They won't screw up their codes. There's lots of ease of use in all of that. I think anonymity breeds irresponsibility, but I think we need DEX, because government insight and total lack of privacy creates tyranny. And I guess I'd rather live with some irresponsibility that we got to go after than tyranny, because it's really hard to beat the government. It's easier to find and beat a bad guy. So that's sort of where I come out on all of this stuff. So I'm a big believer in the whole blockchain environment, the anonymity, the personal responsibility. I think is something that we just need, and people can't be babysat all the time.
Amazing. So if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Investors as retail, do your own research and make sure you're taking the responsibility on yourself with your finances, and then explore, and good luck in the wild world of crypto. Guys, thank you so much for letting me hijack your panel. It was very much appreciated, and really appreciate the insights from all of you. Thank you.
And thank you for winging it the last second MC. Appreciate that.
No problem at
Thank
all.
you.
It was a pleasure. Thank you, guys. That was great. Thank you.